Welcome to Reconnect, the podcast dedicated to sharing and defending the good news of Jesus Christ. That is, Jesus died for sins, was buried, and on the third day was raised again according to the Scriptures for our salvation. It is through Jesus alone that we are reconnected into a right relationship with God. Reconnect us, O Lord. All right, welcome to the first July 4th Reconnect Special. This episode will touch on freedom, in particular Christian freedom, which is quite different from freedom from a government that is taxing us without representation. So one of the goals of Reconnect is to give Christians new ideas on how they can initiate conversations that will allow them to present the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I know a lot of times we are riding around town with family, friends, coworkers. We'll have music playing on the radio, or when we're at a store or a restaurant, we'll always hear music in the background. It feels like music almost dominates most of our lives. It's very hard to get away from it. And since music has such a daily aspect of our lives, not just at church on Sundays, I think we should be looking for ways to connect this element of our day-to-day lives to the gospel of Jesus Christ, and then use these connections in evangelism. So for this show, I have as my guest Pastor Schuldheisz, who will share his 3 favorite rock songs for sharing the gospel and demonstrate how this can be accomplished. And then I prepared 3 of my favorite songs. And so I know some of you might be put off by this idea. You've seen rock music, something definitely oftentimes associated with the devil or just of the secular world, as something that Christians should not be doing, especially in association with evangelism or somehow pointing this to the glory of God. So we'll discuss that first. And so Pastor Sam is the pastor at Redeemer Lutheran in Huntington Beach, California. I'm in his office now. This is the first show which is done outside of my classroom at Crean Lutheran. If you want to know more of Sam's work besides just looking on their podcast page at Redeemer Lutheran, because you have your messages online, right? Is that what I saw?
Right, yeah, we do redeemer-lutheran.net, I think is the website for the church, and we're in the midst of trying to get those rebooted.
Rebooted, all right. So you can also find Sam's work at his blog, Inklings, Reverend Schuldheisz, which I will have a link to that to this show's page, because it's spelled very interesting. E-NKLINGS Rev Schuldheisz.blogspot.com. But the blurb for his blog post is one nerdy pastor's proclamation, examination, and defense of the great Eucatastrophe. So, Sam, would you mind starting just by explaining what is a Eucatastrophe and what is the great Eucatastrophe?
Yeah, so one of my favorite writers, J.R.R. Tolkien, coined the word Eucatastrophe. And he was a philologist. He liked words, right? So one of the things that he did was create languages. This is why the Lord of the Rings is in existence, in large part because he loved making languages so much that he had to make a fictional world in which those languages he made up made sense. But when it came to writing and talking about his writing, one of the words that he coined to discuss this was called Eucatastrophe. And in a story, it works a lot of different ways, but let's discuss first what the meaning is, and then a couple of quick examples of it. It really comes from 2 Greek words, eu, like in eulogy, a good, you say good words, you and logos, so good words about something. So you take that part, the first, and then catastrophe, something bad, a disaster. So what he's doing is, it sounds kind of like an oxymoron. How can a good catastrophe be something to celebrate? But when Tolkien uses and writes this word, he's talking about it more of as a good turn of events, the kind of event or turn in a story that you don't see coming, you don't expect. In fact, it's not quite like a miracle, but more of an unexpected, undeserved almost an act of grace. So for a couple of ways that he refers to this in his own writings, when the eagles come in The Hobbit, for example, and rescue the dwarves and Bilbo out of the tree, that's one of his acts of Eucatastrophe in the book, because it seems like they're at the end, like they're done. You know, the goblins are going to get him. The tree is on fire. Everything is looking pretty down and awful. But the eagles come and it's rescue. It's a Eucatastrophe. It's a good catastrophe, a good turn of events. In The Lord of the Rings, it's several moments that he describes as Eucatastrophe, but one of the major ones is at the end. Again, it's the Eagles come and rescue Sam and Frodo on the foot of Mount Doom after the ring has been destroyed. So these kind of moments, this is what Tolkien says is it changes it from death to life, or even from death to resurrection. So he connects those events in the literary world with what he calls the great Eucatastrophe in the primary world, the true world, our world, the world we live in of history and fact, with what he calls the great Eucatastrophe being Jesus' life, death, and resurrection.
Nice.
So he says that the resurrection is the Eucatastrophe of man's history, and the incarnation is also part of that Eucatastrophe too. So you kind of have one built on upon the other. You have incarnation being the great Eucatastrophe of Christ's, his breaking into the world to rescue, and then you have the great Eucatastrophe built upon that of the resurrection. And there's a fantastic quote actually from I have it up here. Where is it? Oh, there it goes. From his essay on fairy stories that he calls it this way. Yeah, I would venture to say that approaching the Christian story from this direction has been long my feeling that it is a joyous feeling, that God redeemed the corrupt making creatures, men, in a way fitting to this aspect, as to others, of their strange nature. The Gospels contain a fairy story, or a story larger, which embraces all essence of fairy stories. They contain many marvels, peculiarly artistic, beautiful, and moving, mythical in their perfect self-contained significance, and among the marvels is the greatest and most complete conceivable Eucatastrophe. This story has entered history and the primary world. The desire and aspiration of subcreation has been raised to the fulfillment of creation. The birth of Christ is the Eucatastrophe of man's history. The resurrection is the Eucatastrophe of the story of the Incarnation. This story begins and ends in joy, and it has preeminently the inner consistence of reality.
Nice.
Lots of good
Very
stuff
good
from
stuff there.
Lots of good stuff from Tolkien, and that's why I use that word in
a good tragedy.
Yes. In the Greek plays and in things like Shakespeare, you have tragedy like Romeo and Juliet, and it ends in tragedy, and it's actually rather depressing. But in a fairy story, especially the good kinds, you have a situation where it looks like everything is going horrible and messed up, and it can't possibly get any worse, and then all of a sudden it flips and turns around. The
supernatural comes in.
Yeah, and in Tolkien's work, a lot of that is there kind of implicit and explicit because he was a Christian and he wrote with his Christian worldview. Sometimes he said intentionally it was done that way, and then sometimes he would say it's unintentional, and it just kind of bubbled up.
Kind of like from the unconscious it comes out.
Yeah, it just bubbled up because that's who he is, and that's how he thinks and write, or thought and wrote.
Which is something I've seen with like the monomyth. From Joseph Campbell, this idea that all our stories are actually one myth, so it's unconsciously something we expect to see.
Sure.
But with us as Christians, we can see that this unconscious sort of bubbling up, as you said, of this Eucatastrophe emerges again and again throughout the literature of mankind. And a quote I got from Tolkien off of a lecture that you posted on your blog called Faith and Fairy Tales. I'll give a link to that, listeners, as well. Because Sam put his PowerPoint from this lecture on there, and the subtitle is Exploring the Intersection of Christianity and Literature in the Writings of J.R.R. Tolkien. And just from my quick glance at it, it seemed that you were trying to say that you wanted to open the minds of the listeners to the possibility of embracing myth. Not just that of like J.R.R. Tolkien, like a Christian writing, and obviously we can pull out this Christian worldview because he's a Christian.
Sure,
maybe it wasn't intentional, but it's his worldview, so it comes out. But from the article, it seemed like you're almost saying all myth can have this. And the quote I pulled from there is J.R.R. Tolkien, a slide that you said that Tolkien viewed all myth as containing fundamental things, fragments of truth, and glimpses of reality, and that like a broken mirror, quote, myth and fairy story must reflect and contain moral and religious truth. So could you speak on this intersection of myth and Christianity briefly? In particular, like what beneficial role could myth contain for Christians?
Yeah, I think part of it is what we've uncovered a little bit is that these stories are connected in some way, in part to the one great true story. You mentioned Joseph Campbell; he calls it a hero with 1,000 faces, kind of thing. But you watch movies like Saving Private Ryan, and there's a reason, many reasons people keep coming back to that kind of movie. But one of them is that it displays things like sacrifice, love that is unconditional for, especially for brothers in arms in that kind of movie. But even things like Disney movies. I mean, I was watching The Jungle Book a few weeks ago with my daughter, and Baloo is in this struggle with Shere Khan the tiger, and he gets smacked with a right blow, and he gets taken down, and they think he's dead. Mowgli, Bagheera the panther, everybody, they think Baloo's done, and Bagheera the panther starts eulogizing Baloo, and he starts quoting John. Greater love has no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends. And you think, there's a reason all these movies, I mean, Spider-Man in Spider-Man 2 has his arm stretched out like a cross, and he's saving the train from cascading off into disaster. And Groot in the Guardians of the Galaxy is a tree, and he lives, and he surrounds his friends and his compadres with himself, and it's a living tree, and then he dies and then comes back to life. I mean, there's tons of movies and books, and I think this is in songs too, which is where we're headed eventually.
Right.
But these kinds of things show up again. Not that you take the whole system, lock, stock, and barrel, and say this is a perfect, wonderful worldview to live by, but that there's going to be things that are true in there, just because, I mean, otherwise it would be complete nonsense, right? There's going to have to be something that connects to reality, even if the rest of it may be false. I mean, let's take a religion, for example, like maybe Islam or Judaism or Hinduism or anything like that. Christians are going to say, well, of course there's some elements that are similar and common to all of them. Usually it's the law that's going to be similar throughout all those strains, but that doesn't mean that the whole system itself is true. It just means that they may have that particular one, the grain or the broken piece of glass of truth. And I think myth and storytelling, no matter who writes it, is going to have that some kind of connection to reality, because otherwise it doesn't make sense.
And you already said in answering that question that we should also expect this in songs.
Yeah,
so I won't ask that question. I'll just say,
I think we're
going to find this in rock songs.
Definitely, because I mean, songwriting, like stories, is a storytelling itself. It may be a story of the songwriter themselves. It may be a story about something else, maybe more of a ballad, that kind of thing. And there's all sorts of different genres, maybe poetry, but all of these things are more of the narrative style, even if it is sung. And those things help. I think those help teach. They also help connect people together.
Right.
Storytelling communicates too. I mean, there's a lot of good reasons to use storytelling. It's also persuasive in ways that other things maybe not connect as well to people. Not that a logical argument, for example, is a bad thing, but somebody may not be persuaded or may not connect with a logical argument, whereas a well-told story about a lion who lays down his life for a traitor named Edmund, that may be very convincing, or that may be more illustrative of the truth of Christianity for somebody than other parts of it. And the great thing about being Christians and apologists is you can use all the different tools in the tool bag that you have.
Which brings me to the next point on this, because some people would say we shouldn't use these tools.
Right.
Like, it's very common for people to say, hey, Christians shouldn't read fairy tales, and in particular those stories that contain magic, devils, necromancy, or the like. Harry Potter, for instance, I've heard when that came out, Christians were like, do not let your kids read Harry Potter.
They were putting Harry Potter on the burn pile and everything,
or
too.
Star Wars, even.
Yeah.
There's a lot in there which we know is being influenced from Taoism or Hinduism there.
Sure.
So a lot of people could say, avoid this like the plague, and I know this happens with rock music as well. It's very common to hear people say that rock is of the devil, that Christians should have no part in it.
Yeah, sex, drugs, rock and roll, right? That's what you think of.
My way many times.
Sure.
Even in my Lutheran church growing up, we had a DCE DCE in training, which those of you not in the Lutheran system, DCE means Director of Christian Education. Not a youth pastor, but someone who is in charge of directing the education. And typically in the church, they end up being sort of the Sunday school teachers and leaders of the youth. And this DCE in training came in and was like, hey, write down the lyrics to your favorite song. And I was like, I actually don't know the lyrics to any song. It's not something I listen to the music more than the lyrics.
Sure.
But at the time, I was listening to the Metallica album And Justice for All.
Great album.
And the song One, I was like, hey, I remember the lyrics of that song One. So I wrote them down.
Song too.
And it was funny because he systematically went through and ripped every single song,
yeah,
even my song. And I was like, wait, I think I can defend this as being good. Well, this sounds horrible. This guy wants to die. And I'm like, yeah, but he says, God, please save me. And like, apart from God, why do we have life? And like, wouldn't this be a miserable existence? And isn't it an anti-war song? And he just was like, this does not glorify God. And he pretty much said we should only be listening to Christian music.
Yeah.
So that's just one example from my life where
Definitely.
I've experienced this. So how do you respond to such
Yeah,
objections?
some of it's a complicated. It takes a while to get people in a discussion with that. I mean, you have to have the time to sit down with them and go through a lot of it together. But I mean, part of it, I know we're going to talk about as we go through this afternoon, a little bit of Christian freedom is, when and why can we use different things, and how can they be beneficial, even in just what we call in kind of Christian slang terms, first article gifts, right? God has creation, created things in it. Music is one of them. Food, entertainment, these kinds of things. There are a variety of different vocations such as that end up providing a good service of simple entertainment, enjoyment, things like that don't necessarily contradict what it is that Christians believe or teach, or they can listen and enjoy those without any damage to their either Christian freedom or any damage to their Christian faith. And I think there's a lot of good things like that. Clearly, there's forms of entertainment though that do. I mean, there's music out there that does invoke Satan's name, and you probably should not listen to that. That's not a good idea, right? Same with like movies that, pornography is the big obvious one, but there are probably other movies that maybe, again, in good judgment, depending on people's age and things like that, you wouldn't recommend people watch or spend their money on or anything like that either. And I think any artistic genre is going to have that. So there's going to be some things that are, I guess, more appropriate, perhaps, for Christians to use. But I think there's a lot of, I think there's some latitude, some freedom in that.
Do you mind speaking a little bit on why we have that freedom?
Yeah, well, I think part of it is it goes ultimately back to the freedom won for us by Christ on the cross, right? That he has set us free from the law. And, of course, that doesn't mean the law is not applicable anymore as Christians, but meaning the law is not the thing that gets us any closer to heaven, right? If we're going to be knocking on heaven's door, to use an old classic rock lyric, it's not going to be by means of we've done this, we've done that. So listening to X, Y, Z kind of music versus A, B, C, or listening to, like, if you're going to listen to AC/DC versus, whatever. I can't even name a popular Christian band for you at the moment, to be honest. But let's say
DC Talk was in the 90s.
DC Talk was, that was when I was growing up. That were the big guys too. Yeah. So okay. So you've listened to DC Talk. Great. That means you're a better Christian. And no, not at all whatsoever. This is trying to live life legalistically. So we have to get beyond kind of the scorekeeping mentality of living the Christian life and look away from kind of the Pharisees in how they lived life and look more towards, okay, now that Christ has set us free by his death on the cross, then how do we live, right, in freedom and love for our neighbors? Because that's why Christ set us free in the first place, was to not just be an anarchist, which also is a whole genre of music, but to be free to serve and love the neighbor.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also free to enjoy things of his creation. I mean, one of the classic examples from the New Testament is in terms of what people eat, right? Mm-hmm. You have the distinction of meats and foods in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament, Christ has fulfilled that some of those obligations of the civil law in the Old Testament, and also some of the ceremonial law too. And as a result, things like meat are now permissible, especially meat that was previously unclean. Mm-hmm. Peter receives that word from our Lord, and that's recorded in the book of Acts. So now we can enjoy bacon.
Good. So for this show, I asked you to share your 3 favorite rock songs for sharing the gospel. And before we get into sharing our favorites, I was just hoping you could share what criteria you used in picking your songs. Like, what was there a certain set quality? Like, this song meets the criteria.
Yeah, I was thinking through this last night a little bit, and I was trying to. I didn't really have a criteria other than, okay, do I like the song first of all? Is it a song I would listen to? I mean, that's, is it aesthetically pleasing? Because there's some important part to that too, especially when it comes to music, like, of the secular nature, that kind of thing. The other thing is, what is it saying? I mean, that's does it have do the words have anything meaningful in them, or that makes you think too? I mean, sometimes, just like in music, stories and everything like that too, you may not agree with the position, but it may teach you something, or it may expose something that's around you in the world outside. You will see somebody's worldview in the songs they write, or the books they read, or the books they write, that kind of thing. So it may expose a worldview that's completely contradictory to yours, but yet it may still be, it kind of may be illustrative for you.
Right, so almost it goes completely against your worldview, but because of that, we can use it as this is the antithesis of what I
Yeah,
believe.
yeah, exactly. I mean, for an example, it's not a song. I love the Beatles. I like a lot of John Lennon's music, but Imagine, gotta be one of the most terrible songs ever in terms of the content it says. Imagine no religion, none of this, all it goes on and on down
no
the list.
heaven, no hell, and I'm like, wait, this would be hell for
Right.
me.
Yeah,
Like,
and so if there's ever a worldview that's definitely not Christian, but you could still use that song to illustrate what many people do in fact believe or want to believe that is true.
almost like a
Imagine
mirror.
doesn't.
Like, yeah, I can use this song as a mirror to illumine your sinfulness or illumine the shortcomings of your own worldview.
Yeah, I think so. And it's a very easy thing. I mean, who hasn't heard Imagine by John Lennon or somebody else, some new artist perform it again?
I think those were the ones I mostly used to. Popularity and do I like it? Because if I don't like it, like, I'm not really able to talk on this.
Yeah.
But if it's something that's really obscure,
Yeah.
that even someone that doesn't listen to rock music, if they never heard of this, it's does it pop up a lot in like the typical culture? Like,
Sure.
is it in other movies?
Sure.
Is has this band inspired and influenced other bands? Well, if so, then like I can trace the roots back to them,
Yeah.
And so this is something that we all should be
Yeah.
tied to, at least in the rock world.
Yeah.
So this is really good, Sam. I like the way we've at least set this precedent here of why we're doing this, how we're doing it. And we've hit about the 20-minute mark, so we're going to take a break here.
Perfect.
So, listeners, I want you to think about your top 3 songs and try to make that list. And in the second segment, see if your picks match ours. And I'd love to hear from you on what you choose. So you can email me at andy@contradictmovement.org and just send them to me. I'd love to hear, and maybe I can share them on a future show. And please, as well, especially if you're taking a break right now because you just got to work, go ahead and take a moment to look up Sam's blog, Inklings Rev Schuldheisz, which you can get a link to that from andyrasman.com on this episode's link. And also explore Legacy 1517. I'll talk more about that at the end of the next segment. I'll give Sam a time to plug that and what's going on there. So God bless you all very much.
The following is an excerpt from the Gospel Coalition's review of Andy Rasman's book, Contradict, They Can't All Be True. Quote, Contradict will help a lot of conversations get started. Rasman provides Christian believers with a great starting point for understanding and evaluating many of the world's religions. He should be commended for writing a substantive apologetic book that's also practical on so many levels. The strongest sections are where he offers a concise guide on interacting with skeptics and other religious adherents. Many readers will find Rasman's section on the 20 facts on the 5 major world religions and 20 questions that are most commonly asked when sharing the Contradict message invaluable. This is a solid book, apologetically, theologically, and practically. I pray it will open the eyes of many believers to the importance of evangelizing in a pluralistic age. Unquote. To financially support Reconnect, visit contradictmovement.org and order your copy of Contradict, They Can't All Be True. Contradict stickers and tracks are also available. Again, that's contradictmovement.org.
All right, guys, welcome back. This is the 4th of July special, talking about Christian freedom and the freedom that we have in Christ to enjoy music and the things of creation. And for the second segment, my guest, Pastor Samuel Schuldheisz from Redeemer Lutheran. And if you want to see their church's site and get connected to the sermons that he gives on Sundays, you can go to redeemer-lutheran.net and learn all about their church and what they're doing. And also probably find a lot of other great links from them. All right, so we're going to just dig right in. We already laid the groundwork for what we're doing in terms of using rock songs as conversation starters or tools in the tool belt for sharing the gospel and defending the gospel, which is the sole goal and purpose of this podcast. And so to get started, it's either going to be Sam or myself sharing our number 3 pick. And to flip, I'm going to flip Pastor Sam's business card, although I don't know if we would want to call this a business, his church card.
Right.
His Means of Grace card. Or,
Contact
I don't know,
contact
his,
information, yeah.
Office of the Public Ministry card. So the one side is the Monopoly guy jumping out of some flames. And it's all red, and it says, "Get out of hell free." So instead of the get out of jail free card, it's the get out of hell free card. And when you flip it over, you see, because, ... Jesus paid for your sins. That is the gospel, and that's the message we want to be connecting these rock songs to. So I'm going to flip this. If it lands on get out of hell free, face up, I go first. If it lands with Pastor Sam's side, with his name and contact info, he will go first. So here goes the little flip action.
All right.
I'm going first.
You're up.
I'm first.
All right.
So my number 3 favorite, and this is not best, this is just favorite.
Sure.
Because this is subjective, I think.
It's like ice cream, you could like Rocky Road or Cookies and Cream or whatever.
Yeah, so this is a band I don't typically like very much at all, but my number 3 pick is Lake of Fire by the Meat Puppets, which was released on their 1984 album Meat Puppets 2. The song, however, is mostly known because of the Nirvana cover on their 1994 MTV Unplugged in New York album. And so I'm going to just briefly share, and, Sam, you can interrogate me, ask me questions. You can be the
sure, all right.
Interviewee if there's anything else you want to say or add.
Yeah,
so,
right on.
But this song, I just like to use, maybe because it has that antithesis sort of element to it, but I like it because it is well known. I know a lot of people like Nirvana. I never really did for some reason. They didn't have enough guitar solos for me, but they're popular. And the line on this one is, or it's the chorus, is, "Where do bad folks go when they die? They don't go to heaven where the angels fly. They go to a lake of fire and fry. See them again till the 4th of July." So you won't see them again till the 4th of July. And so again, 4th of July special.
Sure.
That played a role in me picking this
there
one.
you go. Yeah,
But,
at least a little thematic tie-in there, maybe.
So, Lake of Fire, this is a biblical term that comes from Revelation 20:10.
Yeah.
And again, is there a literal lake of fire? Have you thought on that?
People ask that a lot in Bible class too. All these things in Revelation, they're so visual, and I think part of that is the style of the genre of writing. I mean, I think it's meant to be evocative, of course. It's meant to give you a picture in your mind of things. But I mean, there's a lamb with 7 eyes in all 7 directions, and there's all these different horns and things. Clearly, it's meant to be a bit more symbolic, not to be mentioned or not to be interpreted literally in the sense of, there's going to be a literal lake of fire where you burn like acid. Maybe if you've seen the Daredevil episode where Matt Murdock gets his eyes burned out, that kind of thing. It's not like that.
Yeah, is there a real beast and a real dragon that gets thrown
It doesn't
in there?
mean that the things it's talking about are any less real. No, of course not. These things are. I mean, heaven is. The things being described in Revelation, of course, are real, but they're being described in a rather specific kind of genre.
And like you said, it's to evoke emotion.
Yeah.
And so, like you were saying in the last segment, sometimes these myths can hit us more emotionally than like a logical sort of image.
Right.
So I was just thinking on this one, this is obviously the image someone has of hell, and it comes from the Bible. And when you listen to the song, it seems very negative because it talks about, hey, these are people that are just living their lives. They're just trying to find a place to sleep, just trying to, they're maybe pouring on the street, just want some dry place to go. And, they're just going to eventually die. And so you're going to actually send them to hell, for being in this state. And it's just like, ooh, okay. But what I wanted to talk on this one is, where do bad folks go? It's like, it's almost implying that in heaven, that's where the good folks go.
Right, yeah. If you're good, you're going to go to heaven. You're going to be an angel. You'll fly. That's what you're left to think anyway. Like, well, okay, if bad folks go to hell when they die, then that, I guess, in order to get to heaven, then you must be good. Well, crap.
Yeah, and that's where I like to go. Well, this is the false image. Like, yeah, I believe there is a hell.
Right.
But it's not that I'm better than you because of something I've done. I'm only good because of Christ's goodness to me and for me. Right. And that goodness has been given for you as well.
Yeah.
He paid this lake of fire penalty that you deserve, that I deserve. And so it's by grace. It's not by us being good or bad. And so it's sort of that, like you were saying, this idea of the law. I think a lot of people understand Christianity as being a legalistic religion, probably because there are a lot of legalistic preachers out there.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the average Christian that somebody comes in contact with may end up being, they may give them the gospel at some point, but they might then turn around the next moment and say, yeah, but here's what you got to do. Right?
Yeah.
You know, Jesus died for your sins, and now this is what your part is, kind of thing. And that just goes back and, you know, takes away what it was just given, which is too bad. But sometimes people thankfully ignore that last part anyway.
And my final point on this one, which I like to use just in conversation, is that ending line. Hey, you won't see them again until the 4th of July. What I was thinking was like, what does that even mean?
I've always wondered that too. It just seems like complete absurdity.
I've come up with a thought on it, and to me it fits perfectly, because when we die, we're not soul sleepers.
Right.
So we believe your spirit goes ahead and goes to the pit, or it goes to God in heaven. But then at Christ's return, at Judgment Day, when all the dead will be raised, as Daniel 12 says, and as Paul speaks about.
Yeah, resurrection of the life everlasting, like we confess in the creeds. Yeah.
So both the living and the dead will be raised.
Yeah.
And then from there, we go with our new resurrected bodies, as 1 Corinthians 15 talks about. And so for me on that one, I will see those that go to the lake of fire again at the day of the resurrection.
Yeah.
We will see each other, and it will be the last time, but we will see each other. And for Christians, that is the 4th of July.
Sure.
Because when I read Romans 7, Paul is talking about, hey, I want to do good, but I can't do the good.
Yeah.
And the evil I don't want to do, I keep doing. And like, why is this? It's because this sinful nature lives within me. And who can save me from this body of death? Well, thanks be to God through Jesus Christ, who is my Savior, who will rescue me. Yeah. And I think this is just where it's the good news. Like, hey, it's not about you. Like, if you look at this whole album, there's another song there, Jesus doesn't want me for a sunbeam. So I think this is an overall thing. It's like, no, it's not that sunbeams aren't made like you. It's no, God comes through and makes you clean.
Yeah.
It's nothing you do that warrants you being a sunbeam. So I think just as an overall package of the theology of Nirvana, we can say it's a misunderstanding of who God is. And just get the opportunity to present the gospel.
Sure. I think that's one of the nice things I like about rock and roll is that it presents kind of the dirtiness and ugliness of sin in a in some very realistic, stark, contrasting terms to what we understand as, you know, things that are true, good, and right. And you can see, yes, this is the consequence of sin, right? I mean, think of like Janis Joplin. Oh, Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes Benz? That kind. This displays our old sinful nature quite appropriately. That kind of thing. I mean, and Paul is talking about, of course, a slavery to sin there too. And I mean, maybe there's a way you can use this to turn it around and say, yeah, they're talking about an independence of a different kind, perhaps, but there's some true freedom in what Christ has set us free from, right? From bondage to sin, death, and devil.
Yes.
Yeah.
I wanted to throw in the sin, death, and devil line, but I forgot. So
hey, that's okay.
We got it. You covered me. That is our freedom.
We got it in.
All right. So what's your number 3, Sam?
All right. Mine was, this is kind of an ironic pick, I think, a little bit, because it comes from a band called Bad Religion, who they are self-proclaimed atheists, I believe.
Very much they are.
And very vocal about that, too. Kind of like, I mean, they're sort of to the punk rock world what, Penn and Gillette Teller are, Penn Teller and Gillette are, to their kind of comedy magic show world, right? But the song is Sorrow. And this whole song goes through...
Can I interrupt real quick? I thought it was a Christian song when I first heard it.
I did too.
I knew nothing about the band, so then I looked them up.
Go ahead. I'd like to know more about why they wrote it, because there's definitely some gears being turned in the lyrics. I mean, just a couple of them, like, I curse the day that I was born and all the sorrow in this world. And I think any Christian would say the same thing, at least the second half of that part, not so much the cursing the day you were born, but... And the sorrow in this world, we do curse that because we know that it is part of the curse. But they go through the whole song saying there will be no sorrow, there'll be sorrow no more. That's kind of the refrain. But when things like soldiers lay their weapons down and kings and queens relinquish their crowns, and it's easy to imagine that there will be sorrow. So you think, well, is that going to really happen? Is that even plausible? Possible? No, of course not. This is not. So they give you a good kind of diagnosis of the pain, the suffering, the sorrow of living life in this world, but they don't offer you any solution. They don't offer you any antidote. They can't give you any hope, really. Yeah. They can alleviate the problem all they want, but that's it. That's all they can do is just make it known. And so that's what it does. I think it shows the sorrow that when especially when non-Christians are faced with maybe the law, maybe there was a specific event in his life, the songwriter, that this brought about. I don't know. I'd like to find out, like I said, more about what brought this songwriting on, because there's some definite, there's some questioning, searching. You can tell there's some wrestling with sin and death and a messed up, broken world.
Yeah.
Which I think anybody, you push them on it far enough and they'll have to say uncle and say, yeah, we do live in a pretty messed up world.
Yeah, absolutely.
And some people then go, complete nihilistic and say, well, that's it. That's all that there is. But Christians have a better hope to offer,
Yeah, and
a
almost
man
all their
of
songs can be used this way, too.
Yeah, I've noticed that kind of similar pattern. I wonder if partly it may just be a way to try to show out, to show, this is just how the world is, and that's it. We suffer, we die, and that we go on. But anyway, I think that could be a good way to kind of, like I said, paint a mirror of the world and show it.
And I think
plus the song is cool. It's just
it's
got a
song.
good riff, good lyrics, good harmonization, even if they were older when they wrote it.
Yeah, and the lyric, of course, there will be no more sorrow.
Yeah.
And I just heard that when I first heard it because I didn't understand all the lyrics. I was sitting going, wow, there will be no more sorrow. It seems like they're talking about
right.
heaven.
Yeah, it sounds hopeful. I wish it were, but there is a way you can say, look, read things like Revelation 21, right, with tears and pain and sorrow will actually be no more. And it will come through this God-man who dies and rises, right? The Lamb of God seated on the throne, who is slain and yet lives.
Really good. I think even with bad religion, for people who are not Christian, if they know, in particular, no, you're a pastor, no, I'm a Christian high school teacher, you listen to bad religion? It almost is like, wait, so you're allowed to do this? And yeah.
Sure, yeah. It may not be that I agree with everything they say, but I definitely enjoyed the genre of music. I like punk rock.
That's the only punk band I like. I don't know, something about them musically.
Yeah,
is just great.
They're definitely they got good stuff going on there. The Ramones, my other favorite punk band too.
All right, so for my number 2 favorite, this actually comes from my favorite band. I actually get a lot of flack probably for even saying this is my favorite band. So I expect a hate mail or people to say, I'm praying for your soul. But my number 2 is War Pigs by Black Sabbath.
Oh, that's great.
On their 1970 second album, Paranoid.
Yes. Great album, too.
This is why I thought of you for this show, Sam, because one time I posted on Facebook. Every time I posted on Facebook something where I'm sort of writing on the intersection of Christianity and rock music, you're usually one of the ones to hit the like button or comment.
I enjoy that stuff.
And so when I did this, I wrote about basically we were talking about Revelation being a certain type of genre of literature, and that's apocalyptic literature, very symbolic. And from my understanding of apocalyptic literature, it's to basically show that the wars and problems of this world are just scraping the surface of what's going on. There's this whole spiritual world behind it, and apocalypse means unveiling.
Sure.
So the apocalypse unveils for us the spiritual realm and kind of what's pulling the strings behind some of this stuff. And all apocalyptic literature ultimately has you either on God's side or you're not. And if you're not, you better get on God's side because there will be a reckoning. There will be a final judgment, and evil will be put to death. And for me, that's what War Pigs does. It speaks of generals gathered like witches at black masses, so it's kind of getting this physical war thing with the spiritual realm, and that they plot destruction, that they start the war, but they don't have to fight it. They leave that role to the poor, and they treat people like pawns in chess. And so for me, I see this whole thing. That's 1 Samuel 8. Israel demands a king. God being their king is not good enough, so they demand from Samuel that God gives them a king. And God warns them through Samuel that the king will use their sons for war and for harvesting their own riches, that he'll tax them and take everything that should be designated for the Lord and take it as his, and that ultimately that will be as slaves. And all that's in 1 Samuel chapter 8 if you want to look it up, listeners. So I just see this is a continuation and extension of what happened there. When we get people in charge of the governments and ruling us, they're going to send us to war. Their best interest is going to be at heart, not ours, because we're all sinful. It should be expected, which is then sort of, I think, answered by Paul in Ephesians 6 as well. Ephesians 6:12, where he says, our battle is not against flesh and blood, but the cosmic powers over this present darkness, the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. So I like how War Pigs shows that this battle isn't one that we can win in the physical realm of fighting, because the song actually goes on to say the solution, and it's wait till their judgment day comes. And the song depicts that final day of judgment. So I just love the whole thing.
Yeah.
And the final judgment, I'll just read the lyrics. It says, "Now in darkness, world stops turning, ashes where the body's burning. No more war pigs of the power. Hand of God has struck the hour. Day of judgment, God is calling. On their knees, the war pigs crawling, begging mercy for their sins. Satan laughing spreads his wings." And for me, it's just great because it's like, well, Jesus will return, and there will be an end to all war.
Right.
And I don't think Satan will be laughing. I think they got that part wrong.
Yeah.
But Satan will probably be happy that he had some of us like trapped in his jaws and bringing us down with him.
Yeah.
So
very good. I've always enjoyed that song. When I was in a Led Zeppelin cover band in high school with some buddies, and we played this one just because the bass line was fun, and nobody sang. We didn't have a singer really.
Nice.
We just played music.
You don't need singing
instrumental.
For this song.
No, it was just a fun song to rock out to.
Oh man, it's maybe my all-time favorite song.
It's a good one. The "Mama, I'm Coming Home" is another one. But I mean, it was Ozzy at that point, but just that, yeah. He's got that weird voice that's you just can't stop listening to it for some reason. It's strange.
Yeah, and he doesn't even know what he's doing. I heard he's like, "Yeah, I don't know."
Yeah, I just kind of do whatever I do.
It's like, well, you keep hitting the same notes.
Right,
So you must know what you're doing.
Something's
somehow.
working there. Yeah, amazing.
They're like, "Don't learn music because then it may ruin what you're doing." That's what I heard him say once.
Yeah,
the advice he got.
That's funny. Good. It worked for him. That's all right. All right. So my second song is so now I went from the atheist band to the first one. Now. At least I think they used to be. I don't know if they still are, or if they started off on a Christian label. But Switchfoot,
yeah,
I think for a while they were under a Christian label, and then they moved to more of just kind of generic thing. But I know that at least some members of the band, maybe all the members of the band, are publicly confessed Christians. Mm-hmm. And one of the songs, I like it mainly because of the words, although the guitar riffs are pretty cool in it. "Mess of Me." You familiar with it?
Maybe.
So that's okay. But it's like a grunge rock song meets Romans 3. I mean, it's great. I am my own affliction. I am my own disease. There ain't no drug that we could sell. There ain't no drug to make me well. It's not enough. It's not enough. The sickness is myself.
Nice.
I mean, so we have the exposition of the law from Bad Religion, and then here we have an exposition of the law. But I think, again, based on the little bit I know about the writers or the band, from the Christian perspective, which of course is better because then you have law that moves you towards the gospel, law that's showing your need for a savior, law that's showing you, yes, you are sick, you are diseased. Mm-hmm. There is nothing you can do to forgive yourself. The sickness, the disease really is us. But there is a great physician, right? Christ himself alludes to himself being called that, and others give him that title, rightfully so. Mm-hmm. Isaiah 53 talks about him bearing our diseases and our sorrows. And he's our man of healing, right? The one who is the healer of the nations in the book of Revelation again too. He's the one that takes the disease upon himself and our affliction, and he's the only one that can provide the antidote. So I think that this song moves us in a direction which actually is going to lead to my third song, which is I didn't really intentionally think about it, but they're all leading to the third song, sort of in a law gospel way, which wasn't intentional either. But as I was looking at them, I thought, hey, there's actually something to that.
All right. So my number one, I don't know from what you said if this would be what you chose, but I mean, if you were in a Led Zeppelin cover band, you certainly know.
I did not pick a Led Zeppelin song, surprisingly. Right. I went a different route.
So my number one is "Stairway to Heaven."
Good. Also good song
by Led Zeppelin. And again, I'm going more like popularity. Like even if you don't listen to rock music, you have to have heard of "Stairway to Heaven."
Yeah,
right?
you probably. I mean, I don't know. At my high school dance, they seem to always play "Stairway to Heaven" at the high school dance. I don't know why. That and "Enter Sandman." Those were the two songs you could always count on, no matter what DJ played, for whatever reason. Those were the two.
Eventually.
Yeah, you get "Enter Sandman" and you get "Stairway."
All right, so my "Stairway," this is one of the first things I would say I discovered in terms of, I don't know if it'd be exegetical research, but I was in high school. First time I'm using a study Bible, trying to read through Scripture start to finish, and I come to Genesis 28, and I'm reading the NIV. So the ESV doesn't have this word, but the NIV says that in Genesis 28, Jacob has a vision of a stairway that's from heaven to earth, connecting them, and there's angels ascending and descending upon it. And I go, "Stairway to Heaven?"
Right?
And I'm like, "Oh, Led Zeppelin, there's a Stairway to Heaven in the Bible. This is amazing." And so again, like the first time I'm using the study Bible, I look at the footnote and I'm like, Jesus quotes this or makes reference to it when talking to Nathaniel, and I go over there and I read it, and like Jesus says to Nathanael, hey, if you follow me, you're going to see angels ascending and descending upon the Son of Man.
Mm-hmm.
Then you read the footnote and you realize Son of Man is a term that Jesus uses for himself, a messianic title.
Right.
And I was like, wait, so he supplanted himself into this vision. So that means Jesus is the stairway.
Right.
Like, mind blown for me.
Definitely, absolutely. What's the ladder, right? The ladder is not your works, right? Not the law. The ladder is Christ, right? The ladder is the cross.
I'm not climbing Jacob's ladder.
No.
I'm not going up that thing.
That song, oh man, yeah. For sure. But yeah, the ladder is the cross, and Christ descends to us. That's a good way to use that to turn it around.
And then just the whole song, like, to me, this is one that always gets bagged on because apparently there's backward masking, which we all know is of the devil. So if you play this backwards, you're going to hear My Sweet Satan on there, which is just like, okay, whatever. And then you get talk of, like, Robert Plant, when he wrote these lyrics, just says, man, the lyrics just flowed. I just wrote it without thinking. It was almost like someone else was moving my hand. And, like, people take that and go, automatic writing, possessed. And I'm like, well, have you ever just sat down and written something and just like, I just wrote that paper. It was like,
sure. Yeah, I mean, I've had pastors say the same thing. That sermon just came to me. It was like the words flew off my fingers. Like, well, yeah, it's a figure of speech. I mean, we use that for a lot of things. Well, I could have used that a little help last week. It was a tough sermon writing. Anyway.
So
yeah,
I think this is one that people always label as like this satanic sort of thing. And I look at it and there's so many things in there. Like, there's two paths you can go by. There's still time to change the road you're on. That's a line in the song which, to me, fits with Jesus in his Sermon on the Mount. He's not saying paths, but he talks about two gates, a wide one and a narrow one. The wide one leads to destruction. The song's about a lady who's trying to buy the stairway to heaven, but the stores are all closed. But with a word, she can get what she came for. And so for me, I see, well, this is us. Like, if you're trying to buy heaven, buy your ticket, which you talked about with the previous song. If you're trying to buy your ticket, well, of course you can't. The stores are closed. In fact, the stairway's already been bought. So there's one stairway, it's already been bought. Yeah. And guess what? You're not the one that bought it. Like, Jesus bought it with the price of his own blood. And how do we get this stairway? Well, with a word. Yeah. The gospel. Yeah. And, I don't know, and all that glitters is gold and interesting things. But, I don't know. Kind of, to me, that's a fun one. And it just means a lot to me because it was the first study I did that I was like, this may be the first thing something discovered through my own studies.
That's great. That's great. It's awesome when Jesus' words in Luke 24 about the Old Testament being about him, when we start to comprehend and get glimpses of that in some rather significant ways, it's fun to see that. Kind of the old proverbial light turn on kind of thing. Yeah.
Awesome.
So my first song, this is some people might quabble about this. It's not technically a rock song, but Johnny Cash did play. He started off playing with guys like Elvis and what was
he's called the Man in Black, for crying out loud.
Yeah, I mean, so he's even though he was maybe pushed more into the country genre at some points, he was a part of the original rock and roll. He played with Buddy Holly for a while too.
Was he really in
Jerry Lee Lewis? He wasn't in prison, but he played for the prisoners.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
I don't know if he ever actually went to prison for that long. I don't know a whole lot about his life. I haven't read too many good biographies or read up on him much. But he loved to go and play for the inmates at Folsom. He went to there was another one too. I just was listening to that album the other day. Anyway, blanking. So he wrote a song later in life called "Ain't No Grave Gonna Hold This Body Down," and so. I've always loved this song. I used it for an Easter sermon once without telling anybody what it was. I just kind of quoted some of the lyrics in it as part of what was being said out of the Gospels. But great. The music video is fantastic too. If you get a chance to check it out, I think it's on YouTube.
I'll link it to the.
Yeah,
I'll embed it in the
you should, because there was some fan art that went into the making of the music video, and a lot of them are. So they did the old video recording, and then they had people illustrate each frame of this video with their own illustrations. And there's a couple of them that even do focus on the cross. And, of course, the whole point of this song is about dying and rising. And I'll just read a couple of the lyrics. Ain't no grave can hold my body down. And then he repeats that a couple of times. When I hear that trumpet sound, I'm going to rise right out of the ground. Ain't no grave can hold my body down. And it's just got this really kind of this drawl, but yet a hopeful kind of almost folk bluegrass kind of early rock feel to it. It is more of a somber song, but it's a great song. Yeah, when meet me, Jesus, meet me in the middle of the air, and if these things won't fail me, I'll meet you anywhere. Ain't no grave gonna hold my body down. It's nice. just a cool. I mean, it's a cool song, and knowing Johnny Cash's history, a little bit of it, that he went through a lot of different things with drugs and alcohol, and I mean, he admitted a lot of times he'd made a mess of his own life, and having found repentance and faith later on, I think this song is kind of almost a song, a lyrical confession of his in a lot of ways. Kind of similar to like he did a cover of Nine Inch Nails' "Hurt."
I heard that.
Another great one. In fact, I think that's one of those where the cover is actually better than the original, which doesn't happen too often. But I think in that case it does. There again, that was kind of his confession, and if that's his confession, this song is his absolution in a way, looking toward the resurrection. I think seeing he confesses his faith in what's going to happen. The grave isn't going to hold his body down, and that's 1 Corinthians 15 right there. The last enemy is destroyed and done and finished.
Amen.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing, Pastor Sam. And listeners, if you go to andyrasman.com, I'm not sure the exact episode that this will be when I release it, but it'll be during the July 4th week, and you can find links to all the songs that we're talking about here, and so you can listen to them. I'll put links to the lyrics as well, and I hope as you were listening, you just got some ideas of how you can begin to use songs which typically would be associated with the secular world. Maybe you're not listening to rock, but whatever genre of music you do listen to, just know that you are free to listen to it in Christ. But use discernment, just for yourself, know when you're crossing the line, if you're being influenced by it negatively, if you start to see how this is coming forth, encouraging you to sin, definitely pull away. So this maybe not be for everyone to just headlong dive into metal music or stoner rock. It is called stoner rock for a reason, and it's not necessarily always glorifying. So you should just take some care and be in prayer, and just know that Christ has set you free for your July 4th. Know that who the Son sets free is free indeed. And I'll just let Pastor Sam share to close briefly on some of the projects that he has. So just plug away.
Oh yeah,
a few
sure.
Things that you're a part of.
Well, you mentioned the Inklings blog a while ago, and most of the time these days sermons and stuff go up there, but occasionally when I have some spare time, I'll write some different things, mostly related to things like C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien, and that kind of imaginative side of Christian apologetics.
Rock and roll now.
I'll probably have to add that in too. Yeah, I did one a while ago on some Mumford & Sons songs because they had some interesting lyrics too. One that dealt with the prodigal son. Anyway, so I've done that a little bit, but now I'll have to think about it even more because this has been a good exercise of the mind. And 1517 Legacy Project is always a good place. 1517legacy.com, and they have a ton of great writers. Thankfully, they added me in there, though I probably don't deserve such kindness, but they're gracious and they do a lot of great things. Lots of apologetic resources there too. Even the most recent one I did up there was on Lego bricks and Christian apologetics, using the imagination and art as a way of communicating the Christian faith. Similar kind of thing, just a different medium.
All right, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
I'm
glad
very,
to.
very appreciative, and I'll be sure to share any feedback I get from the show on towards you, so hopefully you can be encouraged by it. All right, listeners, God bless you, and just remember that it is through Christ alone that we are reconnected into a right relationship.
Your mission, if you choose to accept it. Share this episode on all of your social media sites and with your email contacts, people who will benefit from listening to the show. Thank you for listening. Reconnect us, O Lord.